The joyful sounds of laughter and cheers echoed up from the driveway, filling the stillness of Christmas morning. From my vantage point at the kitchen window, I watched as my younger sister Tessa jumped up and down in excitement next to a shiny red Volkswagen Beetle, a massive silver bow perched on top, like the cherry on a sundae. My parents stood by her side, their faces radiant with pride as they handed her the keys. My name is Lila, and that moment cemented a painful truth I had been trying to ignore for years. In my family, I would always come second. Oh my God, this is amazing. I can't believe you guys did this. Tessa squealed, sliding into the driver's seat and gripping the wheel as if it were the crown jewel itself. I turned away from the window and glanced at the small pile of scratch-off lottery tickets I'd carefully picked out as Christmas gifts for my family. They hadn't even opened them yet. Those tickets were all I could afford after scraping together every dollar to pay for my culinary school applications. Explaining that to my family felt pointless. They had made their feelings about my hobby abundantly clear. Lila. My mom's voice broke my thoughts. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, still bundled up from the cold. Why aren't you outside with everyone? Come see your sister's new car. I plastered on a tight smile. Just finishing my coffee, I replied, holding up my mug as if it were some excuse. She frowned, disappointment flickering across her face in a way that felt all too familiar. You could try being happy for her, you know. This is a big moment for Tessa. Right, I muttered, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Because I'm the one who makes everything about myself. Don't start, she snapped, the warmth in her tone evaporating. Not today. Without waiting for a reply, she turned and headed back outside. I watched her join my dad, who was eagerly showing Tessa how to adjust her mirrors. His proud smile felt like a knife twisting in my chest, the kind of pride I'd never managed to earn. Not when I made the honor roll. Not when I won the regional cooking competition. Not even when I got accepted into culinary school. My hand drifted to the stack of lottery tickets, and out of habit, I picked one up and started scratching off the numbers. My movements were mechanical, my mind elsewhere, until something caught my eye. 3 matching numbers. My heart began to pound as I double-checked the ticket. My eyes scanned the prize box over and over, disbelief threatening to take hold.
$52.
I stared at the ticket, my hands trembling. This wasn't just a lucky break. This was everything I needed to change my life. With that money, I could afford culinary school. I could start building my dream of opening my own restaurant. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't care what my family thought. This ticket wasn't just about the money. It was proof that my dreams were valid, that my passion wasn't just some frivolous hobby. This was my chance to show them all. The ticket was meant to be a gift. The right thing to do would have been to hand it over. Let them celebrate another stroke of luck. The money would probably go toward Tessa's college fund or a family vacation, one I wouldn't even be invited on. Outside, Tessa honked the horn playfully, and my parents laughed, their joy spilling into the icy air. None of them noticed I wasn't there. I made my decision right then. Carefully, I folded the winning ticket and slipped it into my pocket. The rest of the scratch-offs I gathered into a neat pile and dropped into the recycling bin. They wouldn't miss what they hadn't bothered to open. Lila, my father's voice boomed from the driveway. Get out here and take a family picture. I walked to the front door, but my hand hesitated on the knob. Through the window, I could see them huddled around the car, their breath visible in the December chill. They looked like a picture-perfect family without me, a shining trio. Coming, I called out, but instead of heading outside, I turned and climbed the stairs to my room. Within an hour, my laptop was open to apartment listings. The winning ticket sat safely tucked in my wallet, a ticket to freedom they'd unknowingly given me. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting out. And thanks to their overlooked Christmas gift, I finally had the chance. The key felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the door to my new apartment. It wasn't much, a studio above a Thai restaurant downtown, but it was mine. The air smelled faintly of lemongrass and garlic, and my stomach growled despite the stress of the move. 3 weeks had passed since Christmas. My phone buzzed constantly with missed calls from home. I'd left a note explaining I needed space, but that hadn't stopped my mom's guilt-ridden texts. "You're being selfish, Lila. Your sister needs you right now." I dropped my duffel bag on the bare mattress in the corner and started unpacking. The essentials came first: my knife roll, a trusty cast-iron pan, and a few basics I couldn't leave behind. The lottery money had already been deposited. Most of it went toward culinary school tuition and this apartment's security deposit. It was a fresh start, one I was determined to make work. A knock on my door startled me. For a moment I froze, heart pounding. Had they somehow found me? "Hello? New tenant." The voice was unfamiliar, warm, and lightly accented. "I'm Marco from downstairs." I cracked the door open cautiously. Standing there was a tall man dressed in crisp chef's whites, his salt and pepper hair tied neatly into a short ponytail. His jacket bore a name embroidered in bold letters: Executive Chef Marco. "Welcome to the building," he said with a friendly smile. "I run the restaurant downstairs. Thought I'd come say hello." My stomach rumbled again, embarrassingly loud. His smile widened. "Sounds like you need a proper meal," Marco said with a laugh. "Come by tonight. Dinner's on me." I couldn't help but smile back. This might not have been the life I'd imagined for myself, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Marco shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not always. Some of the best dishes come from strong emotions. But anger burns fast. If you let it control you, it'll ruin the balance." I frowned, considering his words as I moved to dice onions. The sharp knife bit into the crisp layers with satisfying precision. "You're not just here for the paycheck," Marco added after a moment. "This kitchen, it's an escape for you, isn't it?" I glanced at him, startled by how easily he'd read me. He wasn't wrong. "I guess you could say that," I admitted. "Cooking is the one thing that's always made sense. It's the only thing I feel like I'm good at." Marco nodded, his expression serious now. "Then don't let anyone take it from you. Not your family, not anyone. A good chef needs more than just technique. They need heart. And from what I see, you've got plenty of that." His words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. No one in my life, not my parents, not Tessa, had ever spoken about my cooking with that kind of respect. "Thanks," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. Marco patted my shoulder lightly before moving back to the stove. "Anytime. Now let's see if you can make this sauce sing." The next few weeks passed in a blur of knife skills, recipes, and long shifts in Marco's kitchen. Between school preparations and work, I barely had time to dwell on the calls and messages from home. My father's voicemails grew less frequent, though his tone remained the same: gruff, dismissive, and full of thinly veiled commands to come back. Tessa's texts, on the other hand, were harder to ignore. "I miss you," one read. "Mom's crying all the time. Dad's furious. Please come home." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing a response. "I can't come back, Tess. Not right now. Take care of yourself, okay?" Her reply came quickly, and it stung more than I expected. "You're selfish." I set the phone aside, letting out a shaky breath. Maybe I was selfish, but for the first time in my life, I was putting myself first, and I wasn't going to apologize for that. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift, Marco handed me a plate of pasta and gestured for me to sit. "You've been killing it in here," he said, joining me at the counter. "But you're still carrying something heavy. Want to talk about it?" I hesitated, twirling the fork in the steaming pasta. "It's my family," I admitted. "They don't get it, what I want to do. Why I left. They think I'm wasting my time." Marco leaned back, crossing his arms. "You can't control what they think, but you can control what you do with your talent. If they can't see your worth, prove it to them, not for their approval, but because you believe in it." I nodded slowly, his words settling deep. "Besides," he added with a grin, "the best revenge is living well. And maybe inviting them to your Michelin-starred restaurant someday, if they're lucky." For the first time in weeks, I laughed, the tension easing just a little. Amelia greeted Marco with a practiced charm, but her eyes zeroed in on me like a hawk. "Lila," she said, her voice dripping with familiarity. "I heard you were working here." Imagine my surprise. I set down my knife, wiping my hands on my apron. "Amelia, what brings you here?" She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Just scouting some talent. We're hosting a chef's showcase next month. Thought Marco might recommend someone promising." Her words were casual, but her tone carried the weight of a challenge. Amelia had always been competitive, and back in high school, she thrived on being the best. Marco, sensing the tension, stepped in. "Lila's been a great addition to my team," he said, his tone neutral but supportive. "She's got the drive and creativity you're looking for." Amelia's smile widened, but it felt more like a dare. "Perfect. Then she won't mind a little friendly competition. Lila, how about you join the showcase? Show everyone what you've been up to." The offer caught me off guard. A showcase like this could be huge, a chance to get my name out there, to prove to the culinary world that I had what it took. But Amelia's presence made it feel less like an opportunity and more like a trap. I glanced at Marco, who gave me a small nod of encouragement. "You should do it," he said. "Let your cooking speak for itself." Amelia raised an eyebrow.
Well,
"What do you say?" I met her gaze, refusing to let her intimidate me. "I'll do it," I said firmly. "See you there." Amelia's smile faltered just slightly before she recovered. "Looking forward to it." As she left, Marco patted me on the shoulder.
good call, he said.
"But remember, cook for yourself, not to beat her. Stay true to your style, and the rest will follow." I nodded, already feeling the adrenaline kick in. This wasn't just about Amelia or the showcase. It was about proving to myself, and maybe, just maybe, to my family that I belonged here. In the weeks leading up to the showcase, my days blurred into a whirlwind of recipes, revisions, and long nights in the kitchen. Marco helped me refine my dish, a bold fusion of flavors that represented my journey, resilient, daring, and unapologetically me. The night of the event, I stood backstage, the nerves hitting me in waves. My station was set, the ingredients meticulously prepped. I could hear the buzz of the crowd beyond the curtain, their excitement palpable. And then, just as I was steadying my breath, I spotted them in the audience. My parents and Tessa, sitting near the front. My hands tightened on the counter. I hadn't invited them. Marco's voice came from beside me, calm and steady. "Focus, Lila. The food is what matters. Everything else is noise." I nodded, swallowing hard. This was my moment. Whether they were here to support me or judge me didn't matter. Tonight, I was cooking for myself. And I wasn't going to hold back. Marco's voice was calm and steady. "First, take a breath," he said. "You're letting her get to you, and that's exactly what she wants." I gripped the towel tightly, trying to follow his advice. If she spreads those rumors, no one will take me seriously. Investors will back out. My parents will. Marco interrupted, his tone sharp but not unkind. "Your parents are already a part of your past. Let them stay there. As for Amelia, she's a bully. Bullies only have power if you let them." I looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words but not entirely sure how to apply them. "So, what do I do? Just ignore her? Let her destroy my reputation?" Marco shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth.
No.
"You take control of your narrative before she gets a chance. The truth isn't your enemy, Lila. The truth is your story. Own it." "But what if no one believes me?" Marco leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Then you cook," he said simply. "You show them what you're capable of. People will see your talent, your passion, and your hard work. Let that speak louder than her whispers." I nodded slowly, his words sinking in. He was right. Amelia's power came from fear and secrecy. But if I refused to let her manipulate me, what power did she really have? That night, I stayed late at the restaurant, reworking my dishes for the pop-up event. Marco didn't say much, but his presence in the kitchen was grounding. Before leaving, he paused at the door. "One more thing, Lila," he said. Amelia isn't your competition. She's just noise. Don't waste energy trying to silence her. Focus on making something unforgettable. As he left, I turned back to my prep station, determination building with every chop of the knife. If Amelia wanted to watch me fail, I'd make sure she had the best seat in the house for my success. My heart twisted as I looked at her. Tessa, the golden child who had everything handed to her. Now sitting in front of me, broken. The sister I thought had it all together was crumbling under the weight of our parents' expectations. Expectations I knew all too well. Why didn't you say something sooner? I asked gently. She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. Because they wouldn't listen. They never listen. I'm supposed to be perfect, Lila. I'm supposed to be the one who doesn't mess up. You don't know what that's like. I laughed bitterly. Don't I? She looked at me, startled. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't before. Understanding. I never wanted to compete with you, Tessa, I said, my voice soft but firm. But it felt like I had to. You always got the attention. The praise, the support. I thought you had it easy. Tessa wiped her eyes. It wasn't easy. It was exhausting. And I envied you, Lila. You were always so sure of yourself, so passionate. I've never known what I wanted like you do. Her words stunned me. The distance between us, the resentment that had grown over the years, suddenly felt unnecessary. What do you want, Tessa? I asked. She hesitated, her hands gripping the steering wheel. I don't know. I just know I don't want to be a doctor. But Mom and Dad don't get to decide your life. I interrupted. And they don't get to decide mine either. That's why I left. Tessa looked at me, her face a mix of fear and hope. How do you do it? How do you just walk away? You don't walk away, Tessa, I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. You walk towards something better. You figure out what makes you happy and you fight for it. For the first time that night, she smiled, a small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. I wish I was as brave as you, she said. You are, I replied. You came to me, didn't you? Tessa nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly.
Come inside,
I said, gesturing toward Marco's restaurant. Let's talk over something warm. I think we both could use it. As we walked into the dimly lit kitchen, I realized something important. Tessa wasn't just my sister. She was someone who could still become my friend. The heater's hum seemed louder as the silence stretched between us. I looked at Tessa. Really looked at her for the first time in years. This wasn't the spoiled golden child I'd resented. This was someone just as lost as I had been. Someone desperate to carve out her own identity in a family that only cared about appearances. You're not being stupid, I said finally. Or selfish. You have talent, Tessa. Real talent. Don't let them convince you it's not worth pursuing. She gave me a tentative smile, but her eyes were still clouded with doubt. It's just hard, you know? Saying no to them. They're going to be so disappointed. Yeah, I admitted. They will be. But disappointment doesn't last forever. Regret does. The weight of my own words settled over me. Tessa wasn't the only one afraid of facing the truth. I had been running from it too, running from my family, from Amelia, from the consequences of that lottery ticket. But maybe it was time to stop running. Okay, I said, a spark of determination lighting up inside me. Let's do this together. You help me survive Mom's ambush at the pop-up, and I'll help you figure out how to tell them about photography. Her smile widened, the first genuine one I'd seen from her in years.
Deal.
For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel so alone. Tessa and I had both been stuck in the shadows of our parents' expectations, but maybe, just maybe, we could find our way out together. The night of the pop-up. The pop-up event was held in an open-air courtyard, twinkling lights strung above rows of elegantly set tables. My station was set up near the center, a small crowd already gathering to watch as I plated my first dish. Tessa was there too, camera in hand, blending into the crowd like a pro. Every now and then, she gave me a reassuring nod. It was a silent reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. As I worked, the familiar rhythm of the kitchen took over. Knife in hand, I sliced through ingredients with precision, every motion deliberate and controlled. The fire of the stove crackled behind me, its heat a steady companion. But then I saw her, my mother, standing at the edge of the crowd with Amelia Stone and a few of her country club friends. Their perfectly polished smiles didn't fool me. This wasn't a casual visit, it was an ambush. Tessa sidled up to me, her camera slung over her shoulder. "They're here," she murmured. "I know," I said, keeping my focus on the dish in front of me. "Let them watch." Amelia approached first, her heels clicking against the stone courtyard. She smiled sweetly, but her words were anything but. "Lovely presentation, Lila," she said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. But I can't help but wonder, how does someone with no formal restaurant experience pull off something like this? Must be a lot of luck involved. My mother stepped forward, her voice dripping with concern. "Lila, we need to talk. This isn't who you are. This phase isn't worth throwing your future away for." I straightened, wiping my hands on my apron as I turned to face them. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't going to let them see it. "This isn't a phase, Mom," I said, my voice clear and steady. "This is who I am. And I'm not throwing my future away, I'm building it, one plate at a time." The crowd around us murmured, their interest piqued. Amelia opened her mouth to respond, but Tessa beat her to it. "She's not doing this alone," Tessa said, stepping forward with her camera raised. "I'm here to document every step of her journey, and I'll make sure everyone sees how talented she is. Because this isn't just luck. It's skill, dedication, and passion." My mother blinked, stunned by Tessa's sudden defiance. "Photography?" my mother asked, her voice faltering. "Tessa."
What are you talking about?
Tessa took a deep breath, glancing at me for reassurance before turning back to our mother. "I'm not going to med school, Mom. I'm switching my major to photography." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face went pale, her carefully crafted facade cracking. "You're both throwing your lives away," she said finally, her voice trembling with anger. "No, we're finally living them," I said, meeting her gaze head-on. Amelia took a step back, clearly realizing she was out of her depth. My mother stood frozen, torn between fury and disbelief. The crowd around us began to clap, an unexpected, spontaneous show of support. For the first time, I felt like the world wasn't against me. Tessa and I exchanged a glance, a silent promise passing between us. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. That night, I served every dish with renewed confidence, knowing that the life I was building was mine, and no one could take it away. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the stomach. My mother, the woman who had spent months tracking me down, trying to save me from myself, was now conspiring with Amelia. "She's helping her," I whispered, the words heavy with disbelief. "She's helping Amelia sabotage me." My mother didn't respond immediately, but the tension between us seemed to ease. From across the courtyard, Amelia watched the exchange with thinly veiled irritation. But for once, I didn't care what she thought. I had reclaimed my narrative, and for the first time, I felt like I was truly free to write the rest of it, on my terms. The kitchen buzzed with a new energy as we sprang into action. Tessa grabbed her camera and laptop, her fingers flying over the keys to draft a post that would build anticipation for my revamped dish. Marco prepped the stations, his movements as sharp and deliberate as ever, while I gathered the ingredients for the boldest recipe I'd ever dared to attempt. The fusion dish wasn't just food, it was a statement. A reimagining of my mother's traditional family recipe, elevated with the techniques and flavors I'd mastered in Marco's kitchen. It was risky, unorthodox, and deeply personal, everything Amelia's stolen imitation could never be. "Tessa," I said, stirring a sauce on the stove, "post those behind-the-scenes photos. Make it raw, authentic. People love seeing the process, not just the end result." She grinned, already editing a shot of me plating samples for Marco. "On it. By the time Amelia sees this, the buzz will be unstoppable. The plan was simple but daring. We'd flood social media with our journey, my story, our prep, the inspiration behind the dish, all leading up to the event. We'd outshine Amelia's polished, stolen facade with authenticity and passion. By midnight, the first post was live, a carousel of vibrant photos paired with a caption that read, "Innovation meets tradition. A dish inspired by my roots, reimagined for today. See it unveiled at the pop-up event this weekend." The response was immediate. Comments and shares poured in, filled with excitement and support. Even Marco looked impressed as he scrolled through the feed. "This is how you take control of the narrative," he said. "Amelia won't know what hit her." But as confident as I felt, the looming health inspection kept me on edge. If Amelia and my mother's complaints carried enough weight to shut us down, all our work would be for nothing. Marco noticed my tension and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "Focus on what you can control," he said. "The food, the story, the people who believe in you. The rest will fall into place." I nodded, letting his words settle. This wasn't just about defeating Amelia or proving my mother wrong. It was about standing firm in the face of doubt and fear, about showing the world and myself what I was capable of. As dawn broke, the kitchen smelled of roasted spices and simmering sauces. Tessa snapped a photo of the completed dish, a masterpiece of flavor and design, and posted it with a caption, "Taste the story this weekend. One plate, years in the making." It was my story on a plate, and I was ready to serve it to the world. I took a deep breath, adjusting my station and glancing over at Tessa, who was perched discreetly at the edge of the room with her camera. She gave me a reassuring nod, mouthing, "You've got this." The dish I'd created wasn't just a meal, it was a manifesto. Each element told a story: the textures of my childhood, the spices of Marco's mentorship, the plating techniques I'd perfected in culinary school. It was my past, my present, and my future all on one plate. As the first wave of dishes left the kitchen, I caught Amelia watching me. Her smile was as sharp as a paring knife, but it faltered when she saw the buzz around my station. Investors, food critics, and influencers were snapping photos, intrigued by the fusion of bold flavors and visual artistry. When the first plate landed on my mother's table, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn Hawkins picked up her fork, hesitating for a moment before taking a bite. Her expression softened, a flicker of something I hadn't seen before.
Surprise?
Approval? But just as quickly, she set her fork down, her face returning to its usual mask of disapproval. Amelia approached her table, leaning in conspiratorially. I couldn't hear what she said, but it was enough to make my mother stand and march toward my station. I braced myself as Evelyn stopped in front of me, her eyes scanning the plates and utensils as if inspecting for imperfections. "Lila," she said, her tone clipped. "This display is dramatic. I'll give you that. But let's be honest. How long can you keep this up? Running a restaurant isn't about making a scene. It's about stability, discipline, family values." I straightened my back, meeting her gaze head-on. "It's about passion, Mom. And if you don't see that, you're not the audience I'm cooking for." Tessa stepped forward with her camera, snapping a photo of the moment. "Actually, a lot of people seem to be the audience she's cooking for. Just not you." My mother's face reddened, but before she could respond, an investor approached my station, extending his hand. "Lila Hawkins," he said, his tone enthusiastic. "Your dish is the most talked about of the night. Let's talk about how we can turn this into something bigger." As I shook his hand, I saw Amelia lurking nearby, her jaw clenched. She'd played every dirty trick in the book, but none of it had worked. Evelyn glanced between me and the investor, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, retreating to her table. Tessa leaned in, her voice low. "You just flipped the script, Lila." "No," I said, watching as my dish continued to spark conversation around the room. "I rewrote it." A flicker of resolve ignited within me. Marco's voice echoed in my mind. "Make a better dish. Show them who you really are." I took a deep breath, tightening my grip on the knife. If I could make my signature sauce, I'd improvise. Cooking had always been about adapting, about finding beauty in chaos. This was no different. "Tessa," I said, my voice steady now. "Get the camera ready. We're going to document a comeback." She nodded, her face lighting up with a mixture of relief and determination. Ignoring Amelia's smirk and the health department inspector's clipboard, I turned back to my station. My mind raced as I grabbed ingredients at random. Lemons for acidity, honey for sweetness, chili flakes for heat. I glanced at the cooling proteins, already seared to perfection, and reached for fresh herbs to create a quick chimichurri. The investors might be leaving, but I wasn't going to let the ones who stayed see me crumble. In minutes, the new dish came together, a vibrant plate full of bold flavors and unexpected textures. It wasn't what I'd planned, but it was alive, dynamic, and unapologetically mine. I plated it with care, handing the first plate to Tessa. "Get this in front of the right people. And take a shot before it goes." "On it," she said, her camera already clicking. One of the remaining investors approached cautiously, clearly hesitant after whatever my mother had shown him. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the plate. "Please," I said, stepping back to let the food speak for itself. He took a bite, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise, then to something bordering on awe. "This," he said slowly, "is extraordinary." The inspector, still lingering nearby, looked curious. "Mind if I try?" I handed him a fresh plate, bracing myself. He tasted it, nodding thoughtfully. "Creative use of simple ingredients," he said. "Looks like you're running a tight kitchen despite the complaints." His tone carried a hint of suspicion toward the complaint's origins. Amelia's smile faltered as the mood in the room began to shift. Tessa returned, her face glowing. "Two investors just asked for second plates. And the food critic from the Times wants to meet you after service." I felt a spark of hope. Maybe I wasn't finished after all. As the event continued, more people came to my station, drawn by word of mouth and the buzz around my improvised dish. By the end of the night, I'd secured 2 new investor meetings and an invitation to collaborate with a rising star chef. Amelia's showcase had been her stage, but tonight, I'd stolen the spotlight. When the last plate was served, I turned to Tessa, who was packing up her camera. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion.
For what? She said, grinning.
"You're the one who made it happen." "No," I said, pulling her into a hug. "For reminding me who I am." As we walked out of the restaurant that night, I felt the weight of my family's expectations finally lift. They had tried to tear me down, but I'd risen higher. This wasn't just my revenge, it was my victory. And it tasted better than any dish I'd ever created. "Lila," my mother's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding as she strode toward me. "This has gone far enough. You need to stop this nonsense and come home where you belong." I turned to face her, gripping my knife tightly, a calm determination settling over me. "You're right," I said, leveling my gaze at her. "It has gone far enough." Tessa raised her camera, her expression uncertain but ready. "What are you doing, Lila?" she asked. I took a steadying breath and gave her a small nod. "Start filming." Amelia appeared beside my mother, her face twisting into a mask of irritation. "What's your plan here, Lila? You've lost. Just pack it up and stop embarrassing yourself." Ignoring her, I laid out the few ingredients I had left. My knife moved with deliberate precision, slicing through herbs and aromatics as I spoke. "I'm cooking," I said simply. "Not your way. Not Mom's way. And definitely not the way you think I should. I'm doing this my way." I had nothing to prove to them anymore. This wasn't for Amelia, or even my mother. This was for me. The timer on the wall read 20 minutes to service. My station was a disaster. No signature sauce, no glossy investor smiles, and no backup plan. But in the chaos, I found clarity. I wasn't here to impress them. I was here to reclaim the narrative of my own life. I worked with speed and precision, my knife slicing through ingredients as Tessa filmed, capturing every motion. The dish forming before me was simple, raw, and unpretentious. Time for final plating came the call from the event coordinator. I paused, staring down at my creation. It wasn't what I had envisioned weeks ago. It wasn't flashy or elaborate, but it was authentic. It was mine. Tessa leaned in with the camera. Are you ready? I placed the plate on the tray, my hands steadier than they'd been all night. Ready. Through the service window, I could see the investors gathered at the tasting table, their murmurs growing louder. My mother sat among them, her sharp eyes trained on me, her expression unreadable. Amelia hovered nearby, smug and expectant, like she had already won. But she hadn't accounted for this. Pushing open the kitchen door, I stepped into the spotlight with my plate in hand. Dinner's served, I said, setting it before the panel. This wasn't just food. It was a story, a rebellion, and a promise all plated together. And I hoped they were ready to taste the truth. The room grew even quieter as my father's words hung in the air. Every face turned toward him, then back to me. My mother's composure cracked for the first time, her mouth opening in stunned disbelief. You mean to tell me, my mother said, her voice low and icy, that you stole from your own family to fund this stunt? I didn't steal anything, I replied, my tone steady but firm. I gave you the tickets, but you didn't even bother to open them. That win, it could have been yours. But it wasn't, because I decided to bet on myself when none of you would. My father took a step forward, his face tight with emotion. You lied to us, Lila. You left without saying a word, and now you're standing here like some hero? No, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I'm standing here as someone who's finally free from trying to earn your approval. I didn't take that money to hurt you. I took it because I couldn't let your indifference hold me back any longer. The investors were watching the scene unfold like a theater performance. Their interest piqued even further. The lead investor leaned forward, gesturing to my dish. What I see here isn't theft or betrayal. I see resilience, creativity. This is someone who turns challenges into innovation. Tessa stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. She's telling the truth. Mom and Dad didn't support her. None of us did. But Lila still made something incredible out of it. Tessa, don't. My mother hissed, but my sister stood firm, her camera still rolling. Mom, you've controlled us long enough. I'm not pre-med anymore. I never wanted to be. And Lila, she's not the selfish one. She's the brave one. I felt my chest tighten, not from anger, but from the unexpected support. For the first time, Tessa wasn't the perfect daughter playing her role. She was standing beside me, not against me. Amelia, desperate to regain control, sneered. This is ridiculous. Investors, do you really want to put your money behind someone with this much family baggage? Actually, the lead investor said, dabbing his mouth with a napkin, this is exactly the kind of story people want to believe in. Authenticity.
Grit.
Passion. Lila, we'll discuss the terms of your backing tomorrow. You've got something special here. My mother's face drained of color, and my father looked like he'd been struck. Amelia's mouth opened to argue, but no one was listening to her anymore. I turned to Tessa, her camera still trained on me. You got all that? She smiled through tears. Every word. As I stood there, with the weight of my family's expectations finally slipping off my shoulders, I realized that my story wasn't just about breaking away. It was about creating something entirely my own. And tonight I had. The restaurant was alive with energy, the hum of conversation blending with the clinking of glasses and the rhythmic clatter of pans from the line. My dream had come to life, a cozy yet refined space where every detail, from the lighting to the plating, told my story. I adjusted my chef's jacket, the embroidered Chef Lila Hawkins, on the chest catching the light. It felt surreal seeing my name there, not as a dream, but as a reality. Tessa weaved through the dining room with her camera, snapping photos of diners and dishes alike. Her photos were already becoming iconic, featured in the local food magazine and drawing in crowds eager to taste what they'd seen online. Table 3's asking for you, chef. One of the servers called, snapping me back to the moment. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped out into the dining room. At table 3 sat my parents, the sight of them still sending a complicated wave of emotions through me. My father stood as I approached, his expression warmer than I'd ever remembered. "It's perfect, Lila," he said. "Everything about this place, it's you." "Thanks, Dad," I replied, surprised at how natural it felt to hear his praise. My mother, still impeccably put together, sipped her wine in silence. Her gaze swept the room before landing on me. "You've done well," she said finally, her tone begrudging but sincere. This wasn't what I imagined for you, but it's impressive." I nodded, understanding that for her, that was the closest I'd get to an apology. And it was enough. Tessa joined us, her camera slung over her shoulder, grinning like a kid who'd just gotten away with something. "I told you," she said to my mother. "Lila's incredible." "Thank you, Tessa," I said, laughing softly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a kitchen to run." As I walked back to the pass, I paused for a moment to take it all in. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the smell of caramelizing butter and herbs. This was my world now, built with my own hands, my own vision. And for the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't proving anything to anyone. I was just living my dream one dish at a time. The restaurant buzzed with life. The hum of voices mingling with the sound of plates clinking and glasses toasting. Tessa's photographs adorned the walls, each image capturing a piece of the journey that had led us here, our food, our story, and our resilience. The door to the kitchen swung open, and Marco walked in, holding an envelope with a knowing smile. "Special delivery," he said, handing it to me. "Found this at my place." I recognized the handwriting instantly, Amelia's. Inside was a single page handwritten. "I closed my restaurant last week. Turns out success isn't worth much when you build it on other people's recipes. You were right, the hunger has to be your own." I folded the letter, a strange mix of emotions settling over me. I thought back to the bitterness I'd carried for so long, how revenge had once driven me. Somewhere along the way, though, the taste of it had turned bland. "Have you seen today's special?" I asked Marco, nodding toward a dish waiting on the pass. He glanced at it, his face breaking into a smile. My mother's signature recipe was plated beautifully, transformed with a modern twist, but still carrying its essence. "How did she take it?" Marco asked, smirking. "She cried," I admitted, laughing softly. "Then she spent an hour criticizing everything I did wrong while secretly eating every bite." Through the kitchen window, I spotted my family at their usual table. My father leaned over, animatedly pointing at something on Tessa's camera, likely discussing her upcoming gallery show. My mother sat with her signature straight-backed posture, but every so often, her eyes wandered toward the kitchen. Was that pride in her expression? "Chef," one of my line cooks called out, breaking my thoughts. "We have a situation." At the kitchen door stood Amelia. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usual confidence replaced by hesitation. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said quickly, her voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I just wanted to know if you're still hiring prep cooks." The room fell silent, the staff waiting for my response. 6 months ago, this moment would have been everything I wanted, a chance to savor her defeat. But looking at her now, I saw something different. I recognized the same hunger that had once driven me, only misdirected for too long. "Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., I said, my tone steady. "Don't be late." "And Amelia?" Her head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Bring your own recipes this time." She nodded, a quiet relief washing over her face before she turned and left. Marco leaned against the counter, his expression thoughtful as he watched me. "You're not the same chef who burned with revenge in my kitchen." "No," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "I'm better." The dinner rush was in full swing, the kitchen alive with a symphony of sizzling pans, clinking plates, and the occasional shouted order. My team moved like clockwork, each step a reflection of the rhythm we'd built together over months. In the middle of it all, I pulled out the lottery ticket my father had returned to me last week. He had handed it back with a rare smile, saying, "Some gifts need to come full circle." I turned it over in my hand, its edges slightly worn but untouched. "Want to do the honors?" I asked Marco, holding it out. He shook his head, his knowing smile as warm as ever. Some things are better left unscratched. The mystery of what could have been teaches us more than the certainty of what is. The kitchen door swung open, and Tessa poked her head inside, her camera slung over one shoulder. "Lila," she called, laughing. "Mom's in the dining room critiquing her plating again." I couldn't help but laugh as I reached for my knife. "Tell her if she wants to rearrange my garnishes, she'll need to put on an apron and do it herself." To my surprise, just moments later, my mother appeared in the kitchen doorway, rolling up her sleeves. "Well," she said, her tone measured but not unkind, "are you going to show me how this new version of my recipe works or not?" I handed her an apron, watching as she tied it with movements that mirrored my own, a lifetime of habits passed down, even if grudgingly. Some wounds heal slowly, I realized, but they do heal. With time, truth, and just the right pinch of forgiveness, even the deepest scars begin to fade. "Okay, Mom," I said, making room at my station. "Let me show you how hunger makes everything taste better." As she joined me, the kitchen buzzed with life around us. For the first time, it felt whole, not perfect but perfectly mine. My restaurant, my rules, my family. Somewhere in my chef's coat, the unscratched lottery ticket rested near my heart, a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. It whispered of choices, of growth, and of the strange alchemy that turns pain into something nourishing. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't serving a cold dish. It's inviting everyone, critics and champions alike, to your table and teaching them how to cook for themselves.